Have Hugh Hewitt from the Salem Radio Network with us as well. Hugh, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm not sure if you could hear the first part of this conversation, but I'll turn to you. We went through some poll numbers. I think you're very familiar with the president, double digits behind nationally in a position that looks very different than the last three presidents who won re-election, actually starting to look more, at least at this moment, like the last president to lose re-election. That was Bush in 92. Do you believe the president can turn this around and win? And if so, how?
Oh, sure. He's down 9.5 in the 5 polls released today, the average. And I would suggest that you were the one to say to me on the radio, go back and look at Dukakis Bush in 1988. And Michael Dukakis was ahead 17 points on July 22nd, 1988. There are some outliers in his favor as well, like the Sunday Express, which has it tied and Trump winning in the Electoral College. But assume it's 9.5 points down right now. I think yesterday's Rose Garden was the beginning of a campaign that will be sort of relentlessly one-on-one interviews. They do miss the rallies. I think he is hurt by the rallies. But that Rose Garden message, particularly the closing stark contrast between what has happened in Venezuela in the last 20 years and the economic recovery that Trump promises will happen. And the president says, look, I did it once, I can do it again. He's got to continue to make that message in every setting. So he's doing at least 1 or 2 one-on-one interviews per day, a lot of them on television, a lot with print reporters. I hope he goes to radio soon. And I think he drives home that message and tries to dominate the airwaves in the way that Bill Clinton used to do in 96. Dole never got ahead of Bill Clinton like this. But I think everyone in the business realizes he's behind, but it's a lot of time. 4 months is a lot of time.
Let's take a look, Zerlina, too, at Joe Biden. I think this jumped out at me in the poll as well. The positive, negative, basically the favorable, unfavorable question, folks' opinions of these two candidates. Trump's is very negative. It's 39% positive, 54% negative. Biden's, though, is 34 positive, 46 negative. I was actually surprised by that. I thought that number might be better. Clearly, Biden is ahead right now. Hugh seems to be saying, look, the Trump campaign has an opportunity to focus this more on Biden, get Biden more into the spotlight. Do you see any vulnerability in that 34-46 positive negative number for Biden?
Well, it's certainly not as much of an indicator of outcome as it was in 2016, where Hillary Clinton had high favorables, and so did Donald Trump, frankly. So it was, a lot of people's assessment that I don't like either of these candidates, but I'm going to vote for Trump and give him a shot, in some voters' words. In this particular case, Biden is a very much known entity, and I don't necessarily know that the feelings, to your point, of disapproval are as strong, but also we are living through an unprecedented moment. And so a lot of the normal indicators that we could look to and say, this is how a voter is going to behave in November, I think that there's a little bit of a different calculation. This election is a vote for our literal survival, not just as human beings, but also as a nation, a democratic nation with the rule of law. And I think, to Hugh's point about the president's message, he can talk about rebuilding the economy, but until he listens to the scientists and focuses on the data that establishes how to safely reopen schools and then subsequently the economy, but not in the reverse order, he's not going to get the economy under control because both of these crises are interconnected.
Yeah, let me ask you about that, too. We have it up on the screen, Hugh. We showed this. At the start of this year, the president clearly believed the economy was going to power him to a second term, and his numbers on the economy at the start of this year look a lot like they do right now. That's majority approval, but it's those other two topics there, the coronavirus, race relations, overwhelmingly negative views for the president's performance on that, especially when you talk about coronavirus that does not look like it's going away anytime soon, certainly not before the election. I know there's the hope there on the president team's part that they can make this, really more of a choice between Trump and Biden. But there's that referendum aspect of an incumbent president running for re-election. If his numbers continue to look like this on the coronavirus, can he realistically win a second term?
Yes, I think so. And in fact, I think that the economy and people's looking forward is going to be so significantly different this time around than it was when George H.W. Bush lost in 92. There was a referendum on an actual recession caused by policy that occurred in the spring of the election year. Here, everybody knows why we have hit the economic wall. And everybody knows we need Moderna or AstraZeneca to come up with a vaccine. Our therapies have to be successful. If the flatten the curve works a second time around in California and the underlying epidemiology comes through to support where the virus spreads and why, and the president can make the persuasive case that the blue-collar boom you just referred to, Steve, that was there in January is because of his deregulatory efforts and because of his guiding of the economy, he will speak to individual voters in, I think it's a three-state election, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Republicans are trying to put Minnesota and New Hampshire into play. Democrats are trying to put North Carolina and Arizona into play. The Texas stuff is kind of laughable. But I think maybe it's an 8-state election. But he has to target the voters in those states. And Zerlina may or may not agree with me that there's an opportunity in the African-American community. But I think the president has an opportunity to significantly increase his numbers on the security issue in that community. I think it's so far away from being not just decided, but even not fluid, given the unprecedented nature of this circumstance. Not only social media, not only the coronavirus, not only the economic collapse and the coming rebound, but also the appearance of the Chinese Communist Party as a legitimate global threat on the order of the Soviet Union back in the 1980 election. All bets are off, Steve and Zerlina.
Let me put this up on the screen and ask you both about this. There was a couple of polls, in fact, out of Pennsylvania. There was one poll out of Pennsylvania today, a couple of numbers from that poll, though. The bottom line number, this is a Monmouth poll, 53-40. Biden leading Trump there. We've seen a number of polls out of those states Hugh mentions there, those three traditionally Democratic states that switched to Trump in 2016 that have shown results, maybe not quite this lopsided, but certainly in Biden's favor. In this same poll, though, they asked folks about the prospect of secret voters. The idea, of folks basically not telling you they're going to vote for somebody, but they end up in doing it. And you can see there is a strong suspicion. It seems there to cut across party lines that there are secret voters there for Donald Trump to tap into, something that wouldn't pop up in polling, that would only come up on Election Day. I'm just curious, Zerlina, do you think there's anything to that, or do you think that's just a lot of folks letting their minds get away with them a little bit?
I think it's a little bit of them letting their minds get away with it, because I think that certainly there are people that may not want to tell a pollster that they support Donald Trump because of the policy impacts on communities of color and what that says about them to support that candidate who implements those policies. But I don't think that there is a larger number of secret Trump voters than Black and brown voters who are being ignored by the media, by the mainstream media, by the Democratic establishment, and really the conversation writ large. There are more voters that voted for Barack Obama in 2012 that did not turn out for Hillary Clinton in 2016 than the margin of victory. That's the winning path for Joe Biden. He needs to focus on engaging those folks because they've shown that they will show up if engaged to vote for the president. On the Democratic side. And so that's where he needs to focus. I don't think there's a secret Trump vote. I think there's a neglected Biden vote, and Black and brown communities need to be spoken directly to in order to be engaged to turn out.
Hugh, just final question to you. You mentioned, the idea of the Trump campaign really starting to turn up the heat on Joe Biden there. We had the number in here. The voters who say they don't like Trump and they don't like Biden. If you remember back in 2016, the voters who didn't like Trump, didn't like Clinton, the double haters, they were called, overwhelmingly broke for Trump in 2016. In our poll, and we've seen this in a number of others, those voters now breaking overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. Is Joe Biden a more difficult candidate for Trump to run against than Hillary Clinton was?
He used to be. I think Vice President Biden was a much better candidate 4 years ago than he is now. And Hillary Clinton really was the worst possible nominee to run against Donald Trump. But the vice president's ability on the campaign trail this year is still very much up for grabs. And on the shy Tory, that's the term that we invented when John Major won an upset victory. That's not the model I'm looking for. I'm looking for the Brexit model, where Dominic Cummings went out and found 3 million new voters. And I'll tell you, Steve, I grew up 7 miles from Pennsylvania. I don't believe that number today. I talk weekly with Selena Zito on my radio show. Western Pennsylvania is deep red. And Joe Biden and whoever is running it is, whether it's Val Demings or Kamala Harris or whoever it is, they are going to be anti-energy and anti the thing that has brought Pennsylvania back. So I think Pennsylvania is the keystone of those three states. I think Western Pennsylvania is the keystone of the keystone. And God forbid it's down to the Steelers fans, but that's what it looks like to me.
All right, Hugh Hewitt.
I think it's Philadelphia.